She arrived at Noel Brandt's workshop door just as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, and the first thing he noticed about her was the boots. They were a woman's good boots, stitched leather with a brass buckle at the ankle, but the left sole had separated from the upper along its full length, and she was holding it together with her hand as she walked. She was tall, green-skinned, broad across the shoulders, and dressed in a tunic and sash the color of river clay that had clearly been expensive once and was now caked with road mud to the knee. Her dark hair was braided and pinned at the crown in a style that had partly survived the night. The remaining pins caught the morning light. Noel was at his bench already, fitting a new seam to a copper milk pail that old Hester Calloway needed by Tuesday. He looked at the woman in the doorway. He looked at the boot. "Sit down," he said, and nodded at the low stool beside the cold stove. She sat. She set the ruined boot flat on the floor in front of her, and she put both hands in her lap, and she did not say anything. Noel set down the milk pail, came around the bench, and crouched to look at the damage. The glue had failed along a seam that had probably been under strain for some time. The stitching at the toe was intact, it was the heel-to-ball span that had let go. "An hour," he said. She nodded once. He put a kettle on, fetched his lasted and his pegging awl and his tin of hide glue, and went to work. The workshop filled with the quiet sounds of his trade, the small creak of leather being pressed, the tap of the awl finding its line. Outside, Ash Run Creek ran over its stones at the foot of the village, and somewhere up the lane a rooster insisted on its opinions. Noel worked. The woman on the stool watched the middle distance. When the kettle boiled, he poured 2 cups without asking and set one on the floor beside her stool. She picked it up. She held it in both hands and looked into it as if she hadn't been warm in a while. He finished the boot, checked the seam from 3 angles, pressed it once more, and set it on the floor to cure. "Other one," he said. She looked at him. "The right one's carrying everything," he said. "Seam's going at the heel. Give it 20 minutes and it'll follow." She looked down at the right boot, considered, and pulled it off. Noel examined it. The seam was indeed beginning to lift, barely visible, the kind of thing a man who had fixed 10,000 boots would catch and no one else would. He worked it carefully, a little glue, a little pressure, a wrap of waxed thread around the heel for surety, and set it beside the first. 20 minutes, he said, and went back to the milk pail. She sat with both stockinged feet flat on the floor, holding her tea, watching him work. Noel did not ask her name. He did not ask where she had come from or where she was going or why she was wearing what appeared to be a bridal sash at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. His late wife Marta had told him once, with great fondness, that he was constitutionally incapable of minding anyone else's business. He had considered that a reasonable summary. When the boots were set, he handed them back. She laced them on, stood, and tested her weight on each foot in turn. She took 3 steps. She turned around and came back. "How much?" she said. Her voice was low and even, the accent of the Eastern clans, her comment sure and unhurried. "Nothing," Noel said. "That's not how a business works." "You've got a pack that's lost its top clasp," he said, nodding at the rolled canvas pack leaning against the door. "If you leave it here while you eat something, I'll fix the clasp while the boots cure. Then we're even." She looked at him steadily for a moment, the way a person looks when they are trying to determine if a thing is a trick. "There's a bread woman 3 doors down," he said. "Hild. Tell her Noel sent you." She went. She came back 20 minutes later with a small round loaf and a second one under her arm. She set the second loaf on his bench without comment. He fixed the clasp, it was a simple brass clip that had lost its catch pin, a 5-minute repair, and handed the pack back. She slung it. She ate standing in the doorway, looking at the creek. "What's wrong with the wheel?" she said. Noel looked up. She was looking at the mill, 40 yards down the lane, where old Soren Vetch had his grain wheel turning in the ash run. It was turning, but slowly, with a labored shudder on the upstream stroke that anyone who watched it for more than a minute would notice. Millrace has a crack in the upper channel, Noel said. Water's sheeting off the wall instead of driving the wheel. Soren loses about a third of his force each spring when the creek runs high and the pressure builds. How long has it been cracked? 3 springs. She chewed her bread and looked at the mill. Can I see it? She said. Noel set down the milk pail again. You'd have to ask Soren. He introduced them at the mill door 20 minutes later. Soren Vetch was 68 and suspicious of everything he hadn't built himself, but he was also losing a third of his grain wheel's force every spring and he was tired of it. He led them to the upper channel. The crack ran 18 inches along the left guide wall, the concrete dark with seeping water, moss beginning to colonize its edges. The woman, she still hadn't given her name and Noel hadn't asked, crouched at the channel edge and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she took the pack off her back, set it down, and began to move along the channel's length, pressing her palm flat against the concrete at intervals, reading something in the wall that Noel couldn't see. The crack isn't your problem, she said. It's a symptom. The guide wall was set at the wrong pitch. 4 degrees too steep on the upper run, it's been sending pressure sideways into the left wall since the day it was built. Patch the crack and it'll open again within a year. Soren looked at Noel. Noel looked at the woman. What's the fix? Soren said. You need a redirecting weir, she said. A low stone lip across the top of the intake, angled 3 degrees off true north, that turns the current and takes the lateral pressure off the wall. The crack can be patched once the pressure's been rerouted. It'll hold. Soren was quiet. Who built that? He said. What you just described. My grandfather, she said. 40 years ago. Different creek, same problem. She stood and brushed the concrete dust from her hands. I can build it. 3 days if you have the stone. 2 if you have flat limestone. Soren had flat limestone. He'd had it stacked behind the mill for 2 years, waiting on a mason who kept not arriving. She worked. Noel watched her that first morning from the millyard, and he understood within an hour that he was seeing something rare. She worked the way certain people work when they have been doing a thing for 20 years in their head and finally have their hands on it, without wasted motion, without second guessing, each stone set with a precision that made the whole structure feel inevitable. She didn't talk while she worked. She made small sounds, a low sound of consideration, a short exhale when a stone seated correctly, and those were all. He brought her water at noon. She drank without stopping. He brought her his noon bread at 2 and she took it without looking up. At evening she washed her hands in the creek and came to find him at his bench. I'll need your stone clamp, she said. The one hanging on the east wall. He hadn't known anyone who wasn't a mason would recognize a stone clamp on sight. It's yours, he said. She used the room above the workshop. He'd offered it that first morning, baldly, the way he offered everything, without ceremony. She'd taken it the same way. He heard her cross the floor at 5 the next morning, careful on the boards, and then the creak sounds took over and she was gone again. On the 3rd day, in the late afternoon, she set the keystone of the redirecting weir and stepped back. The water changed. Even from the millyard Noel could see it, the current turned in the intake, straightened, and hit the wheel with a new authority. The wheel's labored shudder disappeared. It ran true, faster, the paddles catching full and releasing clean. Old Soren stood at the sluice gate with his hand on the lever and his mouth open. He paid her in good coin and tried to pay her more. She took the fair amount and gave back the excess. That evening the miller came to Noel's workshop with a bottle of elderflower wine and told everyone within earshot that the Orc woman had done in 3 days what no mason in the valley had managed in 3 years. By morning half the village knew. By afternoon they were calling it the Orc woman's weir, because it had no other name and they needed one. She was at the workbench when the riders came. There were 4 of them, Orc men, well mounted, in the grey and ochre riding coats of an eastern clan. They pulled up in front of the workshop on the 4th morning, and the lead rider dismounted and called a name into the open doorway. Noel was soldering a lantern bracket. He did not look up. The woman beside him, who was repacking her engineering tools into the canvas roll she kept beside her pack, straightened and turned. "Dura," the rider said again. "Your family's been looking since the morning after." "I know," she said. "There are things that need to be settled," she said. "Yes. I know what's unsettled." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell my uncle that I am not lost. Tell him that I will come in my own time to say what needs saying, and that he will find me reasonable but not returnable. Tell him that exactly." The rider looked at her. Then he looked at the workshop, the tools on the bench, the lantern bracket half done, the bedroll visible through the open door of the room above. He looked at Noel, who was still soldering, carefully, with his full attention on the bracket. "And the match," the rider said quietly. "Tell Harvin I wish him well," Dura said, without heat. "He's a decent man who deserves a woman who chose him. I wasn't that." She paused. "I left before the vows. He's free. It's clean." The rider nodded slowly. He mounted. The four of them turned and rode back up the lane, and the sound of hooves faded into the creak noise, and the morning went back to what it had been. Noel finished the solder joint. He set down the iron and examined the bracket from 2 angles. "Good joint," Dura said, looking over his shoulder. "The shoulder seam was fighting me," he said. "Had to come at it from the inside." She picked up the bracket and turned it in her hands. She had good hands, broad across the palm, with the kind of controlled steadiness that comes from years of close work. She set the bracket down. "I was told my entire life," she said, "that I had one kind of value. To my clan and to my family. That everything else I did was secondary to that." Noel said nothing. He picked up the next bracket. "I built my first were when I was 12, she said. "My grandfather showed me. I've built 6 since then, but only in places where no one knew my family name, feast grounds, a road crew once, a season helping a border canal that was flooding." She was quiet for a moment. "I left because I couldn't do it anymore." Stand at the wrong water gate. Noel set down the iron. He looked at the row of tools on her side of the bench, the caliper, the stone clamp, the small level, a worn copper measuring rod, and then he looked at her. "There's a farmer 2 valleys east," he said. "All discreet. He's been trying to get water to his upper field for 4 years. The grade's wrong and he knows it, but he doesn't know how to fix it." Dura looked at him. "I told him I'd ask around," Noel said. He went back to the bracket. "No obligation. Just letting you know the problem exists." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wheel ran true in the ash run, steady and full, the way it hadn't run in 3 springs. "What do you charge," she said, "for the room?" "What you charged me for the bread," Noel said. She picked up her caliper and turned it once in her hand. She set it back down on the bench, parallel to the measuring rod, in the exact position she'd established for herself on the second morning, a kind of order, a small declaration of where things belonged. "I'll look at Aldous Greet's field on Thursday," she said. Noel nodded and soldered the next bracket. The creek ran over its stones. The wheel turned. The morning came in through the open door and lay across the workbench in one long warm stripe, touching his tools and hers without distinction, and neither of them found anything in that worth remarking on. She was still there by the 1st of the following month, and by then the village had stopped wondering why.